And here we are. I think we're live. At least that's what my screen says. One can never tell these days, having had a little bit of a hairy moment this morning with my computer dying, but that's another story. I'm Boni Wagner-Stafford from Ingenium Books, and I'm here with my life and business partner, John Wagner-Stafford.
Hola.
And today we are talking about audiobooks, everything audiobooks. We're going to talk about the popularity and sales of audiobooks. We're going to talk about the consumption habits of audiobooks. We're going to talk about the production of audiobooks and talk about when, as an author, you and your publisher might decide that an audiobook is right for you. What are the reasons to think about? And then if you do decide that between you and your publisher, if you want to do an audiobook, some of the things that you need to think about, and we'll get into the detail on that. But first, let's start. I like to start at the big end, the big picture end. And so, John, you've got some numbers for us that kind of tell us how audiobooks are performing in the market. What have you discovered?
Yeah, and I think some of the things that we're going to share now kind of speak to why any of us publishers and authors together would want to actually generate and publish an audiobook. And it's interesting that the Audio Publishers Association, through a Forbes report, reports that in 2018, 940 million audiobooks were sold in 2018, which is an amazing amount of, $940 million.
I was going to say
audiobooks were sold, the revenue generated from audiobooks.
Yeah.
Which is up 24.5% from 2017. And, year after year, companies find it hard to have double-digit growth. Well, in this sector, in the publishing world, audiobooks have grown in double digits for the last 7 years, which is an amazing performance. And, it makes sense. It's a digital medium. It's easily accessible. It's affordable. And with people, on their iPads and on their iPhones, it's so easy to listen to audiobook and consume this information that everyone's dying for.
Yeah. Now, these numbers are from 2018. Even though it's now June of 2020, we're not seeing yet a report on the 2019 numbers, but preliminary reports that I've read indicate that there's no expected alteration to that trend. Although I suppose at a certain point you can't continue double-digit growth forever. Just ask economists.
Yeah, and the trend is absolutely growing, and I'm actually going to be really interested to see how COVID-19 affects the sale and usage of audiobooks in the first 6 months of 2020. I think we'll probably see a bit more of a bump in those numbers.
So I'm going to go to another question for you about these numbers, but I just want to, some people might be watching this live. Some may be watching it as it's available to replay, but we'd like to hear from you. Have you purchased an audiobook in the last year? Do you regularly listen to audiobooks? And if you're an author working with your publisher, have you considered producing an audiobook? Have you produced an audiobook? And any questions for us about audiobooks? We'll get into production matters in a little bit. But so encouraging comments and questions here as we go. So I was going to ask you, John, what that report that you're looking at, what does it say about where people are consuming audiobooks? What are they doing?
Well, a couple of things, and another interesting fact is that 94% of the revenue generated from these audiobooks comes from digital formats, which interesting, but also makes a lot of sense in that we're moving away from CD players, we're moving away from cassette players, VHS, I don't even know what that means anymore. And we are we're downloading all of this digital media. So just another interesting fact is that people are downloading audiobooks in the digital format onto their devices, USB keys, their iPads and their iPhones and whatever other devices. And then another kind of interesting statistic is, and these are all interesting because they're kind of new still, but 50% of Americans have listened to an audiobook in 2018, which is, I think, a phenomenal number. So they're the ones buying audiobooks in America, 50% of them anyway. And a breakdown of some of the genres that are being listened to. So we also can see that of all the audiobooks that are being consumed, the majority are still general fiction, mystery, sci-fi, fantasy that represent about 67% of the audiobook sales. But what's important for us as a nonfiction publisher is that there's a whopping 33% of those audiobooks are nonfiction genre, which is, I think, a very good thing.
Yeah, just an interjection here. We've heard from Heidi. Hello, Heidi, that she knows lots of people that love to listen to audiobooks, and she personally prefers to read her books. I'm in that same camp. I'm a reader, obviously, in the publishing industry, not by accident. But you, on the other hand, John, you do consume more audio and video. So we know, here we are a publisher team. I do the editorial on the print side, and you do everything related to audio. And that kind of follows our own information consumption preferences. But where people are consuming these audiobooks and other audio products, you mentioned 94%, I think, or 91% of audiobooks are being consumed in a digital format. People are doing 94. People are doing that in their cars, on the way to work, as they work out, on the treadmill, as they walk along the beach for their morning beach walk, as they do housework, as they're cooking. So it allows for concurrent consumption of information, which is actually kind of interesting. So for nonfiction, in particular, you mentioned 33% of all audiobook sales are nonfiction, and we play in the nonfiction space. In particular, that business about people in the car driving to and from work, that's an ideal spot for nonfiction and an ideal thing to think about in terms of who might be consuming your nonfiction book products and where they might be. So, now was there anything else in those numbers that you wanted to share before we move on a little bit?
Just one small number that is, I guess, something that we are aware of and we know is going to grow, but of all the books that are published or sold in America, there's $25 billion worth of books sold in America, and audiobooks right now are representing about 1 billion of those. So we still have a long way to go in terms of sharing the overall revenue, that pot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the audiobook is just one format of many different formats that are accessible to us as consumers.
Right. Now, I meant to mention this, and I can't remember if I did already or if it was in the preamble that you and I were talking before we started to go here. But that was these statistics that we're talking about. We've referenced America and the USA a couple of times. Now, we're a Canadian publisher. We publish works with authors various places around the world. But the data that we seem to be able to find, it all comes from America and the USA. So it is one measure. There, the statistical differences in sales and volume is, I'm sure, different, region by region, country by country around the globe. But I think the trends are there. Global consumption via digital means is a trend. So it helps us to understand the mix and the makeup of how people are consuming the information that as publishers we are publishing, I would say. Yes?
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
So the next little thing before we get into some of the nitty-gritty around how you decide whether you and your publisher, how you and your publisher decide whether an audiobook is right for you to produce. And I think we're showing that there is a good sales reason and there is a good consumption habits reason. I wanted to just quickly go through some other reasons why you might want to think about and have a conversation with your publisher about producing an audiobook. And I'm looking at a list that I found on authormedia.com. So the reason number one that they say, you've already talked about this, the size of the audiobook industry is nearly $1 billion industry. But this is the other reason that I think is really interesting. Reason number two, where they say book mavens listen to audiobooks. So what that means is the people who listen to audiobooks tend to be power consumers of information. And they tend to be what we might call in other social media spaces influencers. So the people consuming audiobooks then will, if they like your book, find it useful, they will be empowered to talk about, promote, and share your book. So it's not where we think of selling other formats of books to one reader at a time. Audiobooks actually give us the potential to think about one to many by way of thinking about the audiobook consumer as an influencer and somebody who can help to organically promote your book to your audiobook to other readers. Now, another reason, I'm not going to read all 7 here, but I thought this was interesting, that audiobooks actually can help boost your paper and ebook sales. Well, how would that work? If they buy an audiobook, maybe aren't you selling your audiobook instead of your other formats, your paper book or your ebook? And apparently not. Apparently there is I don't know what the percentage is, but apparently there's a healthy group of people that will purchase and listen to an audiobook, and then they'll go and buy either the paperback or the ebook because they want to read it again, or they want to mark it up, or they want to put it on their bookshelf. So it actually can help to boost the sales of the other formats. And this is a reason that I really like. So much of what we do when we're talking about publishing is about marketing. There's lots to do in the creation and the writing and the editorial side, and getting the cover design and the layout and all of that stuff right. But really, where the rubber starts to hit the road is around the marketing side. And so, audiobooks can help get you additional exposure. It's putting your book product in an additional space, so it helps to get some additional eyeballs, and that is almost never a bad thing. So I think now, and I realized I was going to experiment with this because I'm a new StreamYard user, so I was going to experiment with making sure putting a single screen as each of us were talking, and I forgot. So I'll move to that. I'll move to that next. But so the next thing, John, is I think it's time for us to move into how you consider whether an audiobook is right for your book. And, we would encourage, obviously, a conversation with your publisher and check your agreements. Do your agreements include audiobooks? And you want to think about licensing, and the legal thing is a whole other, we'll come back with another show at that point. But before we start to talk about some of those things, John, I wanted to just get you to explain a little bit about your background as it relates to audio, because you're not just another pretty face, right?
No, and I love audio. I love music. I love touching audio. If you can think of it in those terms, in that I spent many years as a sound supervisor and audio editor. So I'm on a computer in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, when tape-based systems were moving out and digital audio was moving in. we would, and I started cutting tape, but I quickly moved into the digital audio world. And so we were, instead of cutting tape to edit audio or edit music, we were drawing a line on a computer screen and saying, from here to here, these are the pieces of audio we're going to put together. So that was kind of interesting. But I want to take a step back even further, where my interest in audio and tools and fun devices comes in is, I remember when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, my parents had a stereo console in the house where we had a turntable and 2 speakers and a radio. This is in the 60s. And it was a big piece of furniture. And one day, weekend, parents were out, or I don't know what, I decided to take a screwdriver and take all those components apart. And for our house, anyway, we had the first modular stereo system, because we took the turntable out, mounted it up on our wall, took the speakers out, separated them in the room with long wires so that we'd have a good stereo effect, and the radio we just left behind. But I was always a kind of a nerd with all those tools. So music and audio happened that early in my life, and I was fun to play with it. And over the years, I've produced music recordings, lots of television shows, sound supervised, narrators and TV commercials, all on the audio side of things, and even ended up in producing video games for a while, and had an emphasis on the audio production of the video games. So quite a number of years in the audio industry.
So the whole point of that is that you come at the audio side of it with deep experience. And so when we're about to hear the advice from you about how you decide whether you narrate your own, you actually know what you're talking about. That was my point there. Yeah. So if an author is working with a publisher, and nonfiction specifically, as we continually mention as our specialty area, but what are the things that you would say that an author and a publisher need to consider about whether a nonfiction book might be a candidate for audio in the first place? So that question first.
Well, some books lend themselves well to listening to, and some are not quite so easily listened to. And one of the things that comes to mind is one of our authors, Heidi, who might be on the broadcast. She's done a health and wellness journal, which involves a lot of forms and filling out forms. Even though it's a great read and it's a great tool and it's a really good book, it's not necessarily one that is conducive to producing an audiobook, because it requires some visuals to support it. Obviously another book that would not do well as an audiobook would be graphic novels and that kind of thing. In the nonfiction space, though, what we've been doing, we're doing memoirs, we're doing self-help books, we're doing business management books, and all of those lend themselves very well to audiobooks, because it's really, here's the information, here's some suggestions, or here is a way of things that the author does this new approach to doing what they do, and it's great information that gets easily consumed just through listening. Right. So the number one consideration is, what style of book is it? And some are great and some are not so good. The majority of the ones that we've been producing are great for audiobooks.
Yeah. Good points. And then so if there's a decision between author and publisher that this is a good candidate for audio, then the next decision is, do I narrate my book myself? And we know that for nonfiction in particular, readers like to hear the author's own voice. So there's a strong rationale for self-narration or for author-narrated audiobooks, but it's still not right in every case. What are some of the things that you think about when you're talking with an author about whether or not they would narrate themselves?
Yeah, so the author narrating themselves in my mind, is obviously a good thing. It helps trust, it helps credibility. But here's the thing. Not all authors are narrators. Not all authors have the voice or the confidence or the know-how how to speak and narrate so that it is actually easily consumed. There are professionals who do this, and they do it well. Authors can learn how to do that. And, some know instinctively how to tell a story that is easily consumed or easily listened to, and some don't. And I think part of the first part of the discussion is, and from an audio perspective, one of my things is what is the quality of the voice? And that's not the only thing, but what is the quality of the voice? Does the author feel comfortable and confident reading their book? If the confidence is not being shown through their read, then the person who's listening is not going to feel the confidence and the strength of their words.
And yeah, those are really good points. And one of the things to think about is, so it's easy for us, it is natural for us as authors we're in a very intimate relationship with our book and with the words in our book. And so there is a natural emotional connection to wanting to narrate for ourselves. But this is another area where it's really important to get out of our own heads and think about what that reader, audiobook listener, consumer experience is going to be. And, it's interesting as we talk, we have authors, in Denmark, and we've worked with authors in South Africa and Australia and the US and Canada and different parts of the US. And everybody has a different speech pattern and a different way of talking and different speech habits. And so you need to understand that a professional narrator has learned how to eliminate most of those. So the listening experience with an audiobook, we want to remove any barriers in the same way we talk about crafting and writing the story so that you don't pull the reader out of what they're reading and make them think about what, I wonder why they've written it that way. You want to be considering the same thing when you're producing the audiobook. You don't want to pull the listener out so that they're noticing things that are outside the story that you want them to follow. And that is
in the way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so self-narration can get in the way if the read isn't natural, normal, strong enough, all of those things that you mentioned. So I can't believe how much time we've been taking with this. We're 23 minutes here already, and we're just now ready to start talking. We can come back and have another show more specifically on tips, but let's talk about. So that's consideration if you self-narrate. And I think what we will do is promise to come back and have a show talking about considerations and how, what do you want to do if you self-narrate and setting up your home studio and technical considerations and all that kind of stuff. But so those are the considerations for whether you self-narrate. Let's move to what an author could expect working with their publisher if they decide to produce an audiobook and they're going to hire a narrator. They're going to get a professional narrator to do the book. What comes first, second? How do where do you find these people? How do they choose? What would you say to that?
Well, as a publisher, we actually get quite involved in and lead, in fact, the way to identifying the narrators and the voices that might fit for the book. What we do is there's a pool of narrators around the world in various areas, whether it's people I know from my own experience as an audio professional for over 30 years, as narrators, and they're different groups of narrators who make themselves available electronically through the internet. So they're all available to us. And basically what we do is, knowing the content, knowing the style, and knowing what our authors want from their audiobook, we will go and present to them a number of different voices and a number of different reads of a sample chapter of their book. And then they get to choose, or we all collectively get to choose, who we think has the best voice, the best read, who understands the book, who understands the story, and who's telling the story in a way that makes it easily consumable. And so we start by, getting examples of narrators and making that narrator choice. Once you make that choice, the process actually is fairly simple, because most of these narrators will, and we prefer it this way when we hire out for a narrator, is they will narrate, they will edit, and they will give us all of the audio that is in a nice clean package ready for our approval. And then we're going to go through the audiobook and say, you know what, let's change this, let's add this. No, we're going to say these words differently. We're missing the message. We need more emphasis here. So we go through that. This is what we bring to the table, you and I. And then we go back to the narrator and say, can we make these changes? Those changes are made. The files are all cleaned up and generated, and it's essentially ready to publish as an audiobook after that. So it's a pretty simple process in that regard.
Right. Now, we have taken to, in terms of where in the process, we have got a number of audiobooks that are about to publish. And we've taken to recommending that the audiobook production happens at the last stage of the book production process, and that we essentially concurrently publish the format. So can you talk a little bit about why we are making that recommendation?
Yeah, and this kind of, it makes total sense to me. When you read the book and when we get a third party and the third person's objective view of the story, they've seen it for the first time, they're reading it. The professionals who we work with have the capacity to comment also on the quality of the editing and the writing, in not the quality so much, but the actual output that they're seeing. So they might say, hey, you know what? We noticed
there's a word missing here.
There's a word missing, or you've got two thes. So there's a proofreading element that it takes us one step closer to perfection for the proofread. And then the other thing is, when we hear it being narrated or we listen to it, we sometimes say, hey, you know what? We don't understand what we're trying to say there. Let's make some changes. And we get another chance to improve the quality or clarify, if you will, some of the messages that we're trying to say, or just make it read smoother by eliminating words, or even scratching, a couple of chapters or a couple of paragraphs to make the overall message much clearer. And we've done that in all of our books, I think.
Yeah. And so, people might be thinking, well, what do you mean? Aren't you doing a proofread? Yeah, there is a proofread done. Our proofreads are all done by humans, and the results of the proofread are applied to the manuscript by humans. And so as humans, we are not perfect. But so that audiobook narration does provide, as you say, it's a different view on it. I mean, you can read it, I can read it, I've seen it a million times, the author has seen it a million times. So it does give that extra last double check, and we have not yet had a professional narrate an audiobook where something hasn't been found. And if we had published without the audiobook, so that's one thing. But the other thing that I wanted to highlight here is it also, and we're just going to wind up and not take too much extra time, but it also highlights the fact that each format of book has a separate ISBN, or International Standard Book Number, meaning it is a different product, and it may be just fine for the print version, and it may just not sound right for audio. There's no reason that we can't make the audio sound
Different.
right and be different. It's its own product. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. So that's interesting as well. There are adjustments that we can make. Listen, we're out of time, and I think this has been interesting for me anyway. I hope it's interesting for folks. We will continue to share this on our pages on LinkedIn and YouTube, and even if you're listening to this not live and after the fact, we will still be watching for comments and questions. And I think we will come back in the next few weeks with a specific chat
Technical.
about and self-narration and setting up and dead room sound and some of those things that will deep six the quality of an author narrated audiobook in a hurry. So thank you very much, John, for your time and for being here. And thank you to Heidi for her lovely comments, and to anyone else who's joining us. And we'll be back. Oh, I should say later today, I'll be back here with Dina Marie for the virtual launch of her book, My Fat Pants Don't Fit. So that will be coming up 8 p.m. Eastern time today. And if you're re-recording, you'll probably, if you're watching this not live, you'll be able to find that later. And then next week at this time, we'll be here with another virtual book launch from Henrik Mondrup, our Danish author, with the live virtual launch of his book, Achieving Change. So that's what to look out for. John, thank you very much. And we're going to sign out now.
Bye.